Hello and welcome to World Panorama, where we get you a complete roundup of all the biggest international news stories. I'm Aishwarya Kapoor with you. Let us start the program with this week's top stories. Investigation continues into disappearance of a Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Turkish newspaper names 15 Saudis in the case. Khashoggi was last seen entering the Saudi Consulate in Istanbul. Trump administration faces dilemma on punitive action against key ally Riyadh. Taiwan accuses China of serious challenge to peace and stability. Country's president refuses to acknowledge that Taiwan is part of one China. China-Taiwan relations further sour as Beijing ups military drills around the island. Venezuela's Maduro government faces worldwide condemnation after suspicious death of an opposition member in police custody. Fernando Albán was accused of plotting a failed assassination attempt on President Maduro. United Nations too calls for a transparent investigation into the politician's death. And Indian-American Nikki Haley announces resignation as the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations to stay in the position till the year end. President Donald Trump profusely praises his top diplomat at the world body. Our top story this week: global pressure mounting on Saudi Arabia as it faces tough questions on the disappearance of a prominent journalist. Jamal Khashoggi has been missing after he had entered the Saudi Consulate in Turkey on 2nd of October. While Saudi denies any role in his disappearance, the incident threatens to upend the fundamentals of fault lines in the Middle East. At stake is not only the fate of a widely respected journalist, but also the future of a Saudi-Turkish and the Saudi-US relations.
Where is Jamal Khashoggi? That's the question that the entire world is asking Saudi Arabia, demanding to know the regime's role in the disappearance of the prominent journalist. The contributor to the Washington Post, he was last seen a week ago entering the consulate in Turkish city of Istanbul to get documents related to his forthcoming marriage. His fiancée waiting outside said he never emerged. Turkish officials contend he was killed inside the consulate because of his criticism of the Saudi regime in his writings.
Being the President of Turkish Republic, I am following it personally and we'll let all the world know the outcome of this.
While the Saudis continue to deny any knowledge of Khashoggi's whereabouts, Turkey's pro-government newspaper Sabah said it had identified a 15-member Saudi team that was involved. The newspaper said these 15 Saudis arrived at Istanbul's Ataturk airport on October 2nd, and they are involved in the disappearance of Khashoggi. Turkey's foreign ministry summoned the Saudi ambassador twice this week to urge full cooperation in the investigation into Khashoggi's disappearance.
We would like to know exactly what happened and bring those involved to justice. We need the names of the people who were involved in his disappearance, the 15 Saudi nationals who came here to Turkey to kidnap him or to kill him. We need to know exactly who are they and bring them to justice.
Both UN and EU have expressed concern at the journalist's disappearance.
From our side, from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, well, yes, this is of serious concern, this apparent enforced disappearance of Mr. Khashoggi from the consulate of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in Istanbul is of serious concern.
We are fully aligned with the US position on this. We expect a thorough investigation and full transparency from the Saudi authorities on what has happened.
The disappearance and subsequent suggestion of carefully plotted murder of the journalist has also cast a shadow on decades of close US-Saudi relations, which have only intensified under Donald Trump. Khashoggi had been living in the US in self-imposed exile. More than 20 senators instructed Trump to order an investigation into Khashoggi's disappearance. Trump says the United States was expecting a report soon, but that he would not to block Saudi Arabian investments in the United States or withhold further US arms sales to Saudi Arabia, warning that such a move would be hurting us.
I don't like the concept of stopping an investment of $110 billion into the United States. Because you know what they're going to do? They're going to take that money and spend it in Russia or China or someplace else. So I think there are other ways. If it turns out to be as bad as it might be, there are certainly other ways of handling the situation.
Indeed, much will depend on the final report on Khashoggi's appearance. The incident threatens to severely disrupt the US-Saudi alliance that underwrites much of the Middle East's fault lines. The US administration also relies on Saudi support for its Middle East agenda to counter Iranian influence, fight extremism and support an unexpected peace plan between Israel and the Palestinians. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
All right, let's get a perspective on the story. We have with us Dr. Wile Abad, the West Asia expert, joining us in the studio. Thank you so much, Dr. Awwad, for joining us. So what is your analysis of this disappearance of this journalist? He is a widely known journalist, and it is an unprecedented situation. You know, a journalist suspected of being killed inside a country's consulate in Turkey.
Absolutely. I think this is going to be a very heinous crime carried out by whoever has done it. But as far as we know till now, there is no official statement from the Turkish government whereabouts of the gentleman, except that we know that he entered into the embassy and we don't know whether he came out of the embassy or not. So there is always, they left everything to speculations, that everybody started putting that he's been killed and all. But most of the report now is indicating that he was killed, he was chopped, and he was siphoned, or maybe part of his body were buried inside the consulate itself. So if this is a story which we are hearing now, it's still a speculation. But if we look at the history of the Saudi's government and the Al Saud rule in Saudi Arabia, we know that they are very, very ferocious kind of human rights reports, and they kill their opponent like anything. I remember one of the incidents during the Arab Spring in the Arab world. There was the minister was asked that there are some dissents within the Saudi society, and immediately he said, let the tanks roll over their body. Yes. That was one. And the second part, which we also heard, that this brother of Khashoggi was, and his wife was brutally murdered inside Jeddah. So if this is also a story to believe, then I think we are facing a very strong story to show to the world the human rights record of a country which was tried to promote and project the Mohammed bin Salman as the new face of Saudi Arabia, and he's a moderate kind of a king's upcoming king. Yes. So these are all issues we have to see. But the fact of the matter is that this man used to be the voice of Saudi Arabia during the Afghan period, during the war on Syria and Iraq and Yemen and on the Libya. Yes. But suddenly, because of the Mohammed bin Salman himself have changed the policy, took all the emirs, the princes, and jailed them and took all the money from them. So this gentleman felt that he should be distanced himself from the ruling party. So I think if we know the history of Saudi Arabia and their culture of revenge and venom, then I believe this man is no more alive.
That's very scary. But at the same time, you were mentioning about the previous regimes. But speaking about Crown Prince, Salman, because when he came to power, he had projected an image of himself that is like a reformer, someone who would appeal to the not only the youth of the country but also the international community at large as a reformer. In fact, allowed women to drive as well. So there were several other reforms carried out as well. But looking at the situation now, it seems there have been several acts that have been done by this regime that is probably contradictory to the image that he's trying to project.
Absolutely, you said it. Because this government have tried to improve the image by hiring an American company, PR company, to improve their image outside the world. That what is the world talking about? Saudi Arabia, the human rights, civil societies, and all this, what about the woman driving or not? Yes. These are not the issue. The real issue is to equate the public, the strata of the society at the equal foot. There is only the tribe of Al Saud who is enjoying the wealth of Saudi Arabia. And everybody knows that there are more than 40% of the Saudis are under the poverty line. If these are the issues in Saudi Arabia, which is the richest country in the world, it's a clear indication that you cannot do a cosmetic operations to improve the image of a country which have a history of brutality, intervention and killing. Look at what's going on in Syria. Look what's going on in Libya. Look what's going on in Yemen. The poorest of the poor country has been bombed for the last 3 years, and nobody is raising an eyebrow about the Saudi rule in brutality, killing innocent children and people, and more than 22 million people are now malnourished, are under poverty, and they are facing famine. So if we don't see it from those angle of their role in the region, I think we will be blinding our eyes, not only for a human rights issue, but also for the word of spreading of democracy in the Arab world and making the rule of the law taking its own course, because such kind of authoritarian regimes are willing to destroy not only their country, but the neighboring country as well.
Absolutely. And how would you react, the international community's reaction towards this incident? Of course, talking about the United States, Donald Trump has said very clearly that we have initiated this investigation, and but he also said very categorically that we are not going to stop our arms sales to Saudi Arabia, because obviously US needs this key ally in the Middle East. So how do you look at the international as well as the US's reaction?
Well, business as usual for the United States and for most of the government in the West, which have already been bought by the Saudi government. The Saudi government knows the value of money among greedy nations, and that is why even the American president himself knows that he's been extracting and milking this MBS throughout since he came to power. How much money? $500 billion? Now he's asking him to pay more to give him protection, which means a clear indication they are quite happy with him in power as long as he's paying the money. And now he's merging allies with Israel and along with other Gulf states, that he wanted to make an alliance against Iran. So as long as he's serving their interest in the region, they don't care about the human rights issue. Tell me what happened in Basra. Tell me what happened in Raqqa, in Syria. Tell me what's happening in Yemen. Are they really bothered about human rights issue? In your report itself now, I was listening to Venezuela. The UN have condemned the killing of an opposition by the police. Yes. Here you have a case of a Saudi descent who went to his own embassy in Turkey, and you are covering the matter on, and you're just projecting and showing your concern to the world that the man has been killed. We know whereabout he is. It is a public which is taking the issue. It is the media that have taken the issue that the man has been killed. We needed to know whereabout he and why he was killed, and if he was killed, where is his body?
Absolutely. So indeed, so far, Donald Trump has done little really to suggest that evidence of Saudi misbehavior could compel him to really disrupt its close relationship with the kingdom. But of course, much would further depend on the details that emerge on the story, and also what contents of the investigation report when it comes out, what that would be. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us and sharing your perspective on that entire story. Thank you so much. And on to the other top story this week. Tensions between China and Taiwan have reached their highest point in years. Taiwan's president starkly warned of the threat that China poses to the rest of the world during her National Day speech. She further vowed that Taipei will not surrender to Chinese suppression. The developments come as Beijing has intensified military activity surrounding Taiwan in recent years and has made a concerted effort to poach Taiwan's dwindling number of official allies. And the US is backing China's key rival in the South China Sea dispute, which Beijing claims is part of its territory. Beijing has also responded with fury to any US's gestures towards Taiwan.
Taiwan's infantry and air force conducting a joint anti-invasion drill on the eve of island's National Day on Wednesday. The drill started with fictitious enemy troops taking over an airbase near the northern city of Taoyuan, followed by a joint operation of Taiwan's military and air force to reclaim the control of the base. During the National Day celebrations, Taiwan President Tsai Ing-wen vowed to enhance national security, warning that her government will not submit to Chinese suppression. The developments come as Beijing ramps up pressure to assert sovereignty over the island.
Effective response strategies must be rooted in national strength. Our most important task is to strengthen national security, economy, and the social safety net. This is Taiwan's niche for sustainable survival.
Tsai's speech echoed strong comments made by US Vice President Mike Pence last week. At a speech at a think tank in the US, Pence accused the Chinese government of being a negative influence on both the US and the rest of the world. However, China hit back at the US, calling its accusations, including that concerning Taiwan, as unfounded. The war of words came just days after Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi met with the visiting US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, during which Beijing urged the US to follow the One China principle. Despite Taiwan having been self-governed since the end of the Chinese Civil War in 1949, Beijing views it as a part of its territory and has repeatedly called for its reunification with the mainland by force if necessary. In her speech, Tsai said while she would not move to confrontation with China in a moment of anger, but will also not sacrifice Taiwan's sovereignty. She blamed China's increased pressure on Taiwan for changing the status quo across the Taiwan Strait, souring bilateral relations.
As Taiwan is on the front line of the Western Pacific, we are naturally subject to tremendous pressure. For some time now, China's unilateral diplomatic offensive and military coercion have not only harmed cross-strait relations, they have also seriously challenged the status quo of peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait.
China has termed Tsai's speech evil and provocative. Relations between Taipei and Beijing have cooled dramatically since Tsai was elected in 2016, resulting in clashing displays of military power and strained economic ties across the Taiwan Strait. The Chinese government is concerned about pro-independent sentiments in Tsai's ruling party, which has historically called for the island to formally separate itself from the mainland China. However, Tsai herself faces an internal challenge as local elections are due in late November, that are being seen as a bellwether for her ruling party's performance in presidential elections due in 2020. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
And in World Panorama, we'll take a very short break, but don't go anywhere. More global stories that made headlines this week coming up ahead, so stay tuned. Welcome back after the break. Now, this week saw intense questioning and condemnation of Venezuela's leadership. This after one of the suspects accused of trying to assassinate Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro died under mysterious circumstances. Now, Maduro government says that the lawmaker evaded justice by throwing himself from the 10th floor of a police building. But opposition leaders, backed by several foreign governments, have cast doubt on the official version and accused Maduro's government of torture and murdering the politician.
Venezuelan lawmaker Fernando Albán being laid to rest. Covered with the national flag, Albán's casket was placed in the inside garden of Parliament, while groups of opposition lawmakers stood guard at the foot of the coffin. Authorities say municipal lawmaker Albán committed suicide by jumping from the 10th floor of the headquarters of State Intelligence Agency where he was being held. But the opposition parties say he was murdered.
There is nothing further from the truth with Fernando Albán taking his own life. That's impossible. Fernando Albán was killed by this totalitarian dictatorship, by this very real socialism.
Interestingly, the government and Venezuelan Attorney General gave conflicting accounts of Alban's death. Venezuela's Interior Minister Nestor Luis Reverol said that as Alban was being transferred to court, he threw himself out of a window. However, Venezuelan Attorney General Tarek William Saab in an interview said that Alban flung himself from the window after asking permission to go to the bathroom. Maduro critics accuse the regime of murdering Alban as part of a massive crackdown on opposition groups and human rights activists.
We can't continue with this country of violence, of murder, of corruption. This Venezuela that is a failed state, which Nicolas Maduro is responsible for. But we have to fight hard to change this reality, change everything with the force that change means in Venezuela.
Alban was arrested on Friday for trying to assassinate Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro using drones armed with explosives on 4th August this year. 2 loud explosions were heard, and while Maduro escaped the attack unharmed, 7 members of Venezuela's National Guard were injured. Maduro claims far-right agitators and former Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos were behind the assassination attempt. Colombia has denied the allegations. More than 24 people have been jailed on suspicion of involvement in the plot. Meanwhile, the US State Department said it condemns what it called a human rights violation, while Spain called for consultations the Venezuelan ambassador in Madrid over the death. The UN Human Rights Office has called for an independent probe into Alban's death.
The state obligation, clearly, yes. I mean, Fernando Alban was in state custody. The state had a responsibility to ensure his safety. And personal integrity and dignity. We are concerned about news of his death and also concerned about the fact that he wasn't presented to a judge within 48 hours, which is the requirement under Venezuelan law.
The death of government opponents while in state custody came as a shock to many Venezuelans. Opposition and human rights groups have accused Maduro's administration of holding hundreds of political prisoners on phony charges in an attempt to stifle dissent. The United Nations has said detainees are often subjected to ill treatment and in some cases torture. The Venezuelan government consistently denies that it is detaining people as political prisoners and claims those who are being held have been fairly jailed. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
An Indian American, Nikki Haley, stepped down as the United States ambassador to the United Nations on 9th of October amid speculation that she might be a candidate in the 2020 presidential election. With this, Haley became the 3rd senior member of Donald Trump's national security team to resign in the last 7 months.
US Ambassador to the United Nations Nikki Haley has resigned after nearly 2 years in the post on October 9. Accepting her resignation, President Trump praised Haley as a fantastic person who has done an incredible job. Sitting side by side in the Oval Office, Trump further added that he hoped she could come back to the administration. The 46-year-old former South Carolina governor, one of the few women in the Trump cabinet, gave no reason for her exit.
I'm not leaving until the end of the year. My goal is that we make sure that everything is in good place and for the next ambassador to come in. But it's a great day in the United States, and I'm proud to have been part of the team.
She's a fantastic person, very importantly, but she also is somebody that gets it. She has been at the United Nations from the beginning with us, right from the beginning, and worked with us on the campaign. It's been really a long time, very intense, and she told me probably 6 months ago, she said, you know, maybe at the end of the year, at the end of a 2-year period, but the end of the year, I want to take a little time off. I want to take a little break.
Hours after the announcement of Haley's resignation, Trump said he would consider the candidature of Dina Powell, his former deputy Security Council advisor, for the post. The US president also added Haley would help him make the final pick for a replacement.
Well, Dina is certainly a person I would consider, and she is under consideration. We have actually many names, and you know, Nikki has been great. Nikki's going to be working along with us and helping us with the choice.
A former governor of South Carolina who is daughter of Indian immigrants, Haley is also seen as a rising star of the Republican Party and a possible candidate for the 2020 presidential elections. Haley is the latest in the long list of senior staff members to leave the Trump administration, including former Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, who was fired in March. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
And that's all in this edition of World Panorama. But before we go, take a look at this unusual employee of the municipality in Kaliningrad town in Russia. Now, this woman has been given a bicycle and a uniform, and she has been employed for the post of a cat chief. And her duty is to tend to the town's approximately 70 stray cats. The small town has also erected a cat statue and added a feline to its emblem as it wants to rebrand itself as Russia's foremost cat-loving community. So take a look at the guardian of this Russian town's felines as I take your leave. Thanks so much for watching.